Welcome to this explainer. Seriously, can our human minds actually comprehend the infinite essence of God?
Think of your intellect like a tiny scale. It literally just breaks under infinite weight.
Okay, let's dive into the ladder to the sky, connecting cosmic existence to everyday human morality.
Here's our roadmap. We're covering everything from the limits of the intellect down to unconditional goodness.
So, to make sense of this, philosophers divide all reality into three distinct levels of existence.
God is the absolute necessity. You, me, and everything else, we're just possible existences.
Now, let's look at the simple analogy of water to see how we actually perceive reality.
Physical water quenches thirst, mental water stays in your memory, but linguistic reality constantly changes.
Since our minds can't grasp God's pure essence, we actually use a metaphorical ladder to connect.
Allah is the pure essence, right? These beautiful names are just attributes describing that absolute perfection. Basically, to understand infinite greatness, you literally have to start by accepting your own smallness.
But how does this play out daily? I mean, who actually chooses your destiny?
Well, there's this perfect balance between divine will and the limited human will we're gifted.
It's like being on a train. You walk freely between cars, but the train follows set tracks.
As the saying goes, wish so I may grant it. You gotta push the door first. Okay, but if we have free will, why do we constantly face such immense, agonizing pressure?
Without pressure, carbon just stays as coal. But with it, it turns into a brilliant diamond. So complain about the pressure, and you choose coal. Embrace it, and you become a diamond.
This brings us to morality. Are you doing good unconditionally, or are you just keeping score?
If you only help folks who help you, that's just a calculated transaction, not actual goodness.
Unconditional goodness is done purely because it's the right thing, regardless of who thanks you.
Seriously, if gratitude was the goal, why would we ever bother helping animals or unconscious people?
Ultimately, returning good to people who actively wrong you, now that shows true spiritual courage.
Evil advertises evil, but your unconditional good deeds actually put pure grace back into circulation.
So will you stay simple, coal, or choose unconditional goodness and forge yourself into a diamond?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly fascinating. We're going to map out the invisible truths of existence, the nature of the divine, and the incredibly complex mechanics of human free will. And the best part? We're exploring source material that breaks all this down using some absolutely brilliant everyday metaphors. So let's just jump right in.
So let's kick things off with a direct question. Can a finite mind actually grasp the infinite? Really think about that for a second. Can a mind that's totally bound by time, space, and physical limits comprehend an entity that has literally none of those restrictions? Well, according to the framework we're looking at today, the answer is a hard no. Trying to completely picture the absolute essence of God, it's just an impossible task for us. The source brings in this beautiful poetic metaphor by Zia Pasha to explain this. It basically translates to, comprehending the highest truths is not for this small mind, for this scale cannot bear such a heavy weight. It's the metaphor of a broken scale. Think about taking an infinite, immeasurable mass and just dropping it onto a tiny little scale made for measuring everyday objects. You don't get a reading. The scale just breaks. And human cognition, that's our finite scale. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. To even begin to understand the infinite, we've got to first recognize the absolute smallness of our own scale. We can't comprehend God's pure essence, what's called the Zat, directly. Instead, the only way we can start to know the divine is by fully owning our own utter limitations. Recognizing just how small we are is the very first step to perceiving that greatness. Section 1. The degrees of existence.
All right, so this source categorizes reality into 3 degrees of existence. First up, we've got Vasibul Wujud, or necessary existence. This is God. This existence is absolute. It owes its being to nothing else, and its non-existence is totally unthinkable. Second is Mumkin ul Wujud, or possible existence. That's us. It's the universe, the planets, literally everything else. We only exist because we were willed into the realm of possibility by the necessary existence. We have a start date, and we could just as easily not exist. And third, Muhail Wujud, impossible existence, which is just absolute pure nothingness. Which is kind of funny because, as the text points out, even thinking about pure nothingness requires a mind that already exists. Section 2. The forms of reality. Now, how do we actually perceive these degrees of existence in our daily lives? The source uses this incredible comparison with a simple glass of water. You've got universal reality, which is both physical and mental. The physical reality is the actual liquid in the glass. The mental reality is that universal image of water in your head, though obviously just thinking about water isn't going to quench your thirst. Both of these are universal. They don't change whether you're in the East or the West. But then you have linguistic reality, and this absolutely changes. An English speaker says water, a Turkish speaker says su, an Arab says ma, a Persian says ab. The linguistic label is always shifting, but the core reality, that stays exactly the same. So let's apply that water analogy directly to the divine. If the word water instantly pops an image of a clear, refreshing liquid into your mind, what comes to mind when you say the word Allah? Remember, we already established that our finite minds can't picture the infinite essence. So the mind needs something else to hold on to, right? It needs attributes. And that's exactly where we get the concept of the Esma-ul Husna, which translates to the beautiful names or perfect attributes of God. Since we can't picture the absolute essence of God, these names give us a necessary mental framework. The source beautifully describes them as a ladder extended from the heavens, just to help our human minds climb up and conceptualize the divine. Names like the merciful, the knowing, the creator, they give our finite minds the actual attributes we need to fill in that mental reality. And there's this really fascinating mathematical detail here. In classical lists, like the famous one from the scholar Tirmidhi, we usually hear about the 99 names. But the source points out that there are actually 99 attributes, plus one absolute proper name, Allah, which acts as the anchor that all those other attributes describe. So if you look at the complete mathematical framework of this conceptual ladder, it's actually exactly 100. Section 3, Diamonds and Attributes. So if we have this ladder, how do we actually use it to seek understanding? Well, the source warns against a huge logical trap, seeking from the infinite, which is a top-down approach. Starting our questioning from the infinite, totally incomprehensible essence of God is, frankly, like trying to do a PhD before you've even gone to kindergarten. It's just way beyond our capacity. Instead, the correct path is bottoms up. We have to start from the finite. We look at the observable chains of cause and effect right in front of us in the physical world, and we follow them upward. To explain this bottom-up path, the text uses one of the most striking metaphors I've ever seen, the physical transformation of carbon. Think about it. You start with basic carbon or ash. If you put it under light pressure, it turns into a lump of coal. But if you subject it to intense, immense, absolutely crushing pressure, it becomes a tiny yet infinitely valuable diamond. Immense pressure literally creates immense value. And here's how that connects right back to us. Worldly pressure and immense hardship are exactly what transform an ordinary soul into a diamond. The source points to historical figures who went through monumental suffering, like Bilal or the prophet Ayub, also known as Job. It was precisely the crushing pressure of their trials that forged them into spiritual diamonds. So when you're faced with hardship, it totally shifts your perspective. Instead of just complaining about the pressure, you realize you're actually being forged into something of incredible value. Section 4. The train of free will. Now we're pivoting into what is, for sure, one of the most complex philosophical dilemmas ever. Human choice versus divine destiny. Like, how can we possibly have free will if an all-knowing divine force is already completely in control? The text tackles this by separating will into two distinct buckets. Kuzi irade is human will. It's restricted, it's individual, and it's localized to you. Then there's kuli irade, divine will, which is absolute, overarching, and universal. And the argument here is that these two don't cancel each other out at all. Your human will actually operates concurrently right inside the divine will. To visualize this, the source gives us this absolutely brilliant train analogy. Okay, imagine you're on a moving train. Step 1, you have complete freedom to stand up, walk between the cars, go forward, walk backward. That's your human will. You are entirely free within that specific space. But step 2, the train itself is traveling along its predetermined tracks toward a very specific destination. That is the divine will. So your personal choices are operating completely freely, but they're doing so within the larger, unstoppable trajectory of divine destiny. But here's the catch. Having that free will inside the train requires you to actually do something. The source sums this dynamic up with a really powerful phrase, wish so that I may wish. The whole idea is that God waits for us to actively use our restricted will. If you're just sitting passively in your seat, staring at a closed door and expecting it to magically swing open for you, well, you're rejecting the gift of your own agency. You have to actually reach out and turn the handle. You must use your human will in order for the divine will to open the path.
Section 5. Doing good. Okay, so we've covered existence, perception, and free will. Now let's transition to how we actually apply all this to the real world. The source draws a really sharp line between two types of goodness. First is Hespi, goodness, which is totally unconditional. It's doing good simply because it's the right thing to do. On the flip side is Hasabi goodness. This is conditional, calculated goodness. It's when you do a favor, but it's based on calculating who the recipient is, what their status is, or, let's be honest, what you might get in return.
The text calls out some massive moral flaws with this conditional, calculated goodness. Think about it. If your goodness requires a grateful, aware recipient who can pay you back, your morality completely falls apart in a lot of real-world situations. It fails when you interact with animals, because they can't thank you. It fails when you're helping someone who's unconscious or severely ill. And it absolutely fails when you're dealing with someone who has wronged you. The source argues that true virtue simply cannot require a transactional payback. Furthermore, the way we act dictates the very environment we live in. The source makes this point that every single evil act is essentially an advertisement for evil. It just pumps more negativity into circulation. But on the other hand, every good act, especially showing unconditional goodness towards someone who might have even harmed us, is a propagation of goodness. It actively injects virtue right back into this spiritual ecosystem. So I want to leave you with a highly provocative question to chew on straight from this philosophy. Take a second and look at your own ethical motivations. Are you doing good because it's calculated, because it benefits you, or because you expect to thank you? Or are you doing good unconditionally, simply because it is intrinsically good? Keep pondering your own skills of measurement, and thank you so much for joining us on this explainer today.
I want you to picture something, just visualize this for a second. Imagine you have this massive, fully loaded freight train.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, right? Like, we were talking thousands of tons of steel, cargo, just raw momentum.
Right.
Now, imagine trying to weigh that entire locomotive using one of those flimsy plastic digital kitchen scales, the ones you have sitting on your counter.
Oh, the little ones for, like, baking?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The ones designed to measure out like maybe 100 grams of flour for a cake recipe or whatever.
Yeah.
So you take this little piece of plastic, you set it on the train tracks, and you somehow manage to lower the steel wheels of that colossal train directly onto it.
Right.
What actually happens in that moment?
I mean, it's not a measurement. It is
Yeah.
just total instantaneous destruction.
Right. It doesn't just flash an error message.
No, definitely not.
It doesn't just max out the numbers on the little LCD screen and say, like, too heavy. The physical mechanism itself is completely obliterated. It shatters into dust.
Well, yeah, because the tool is fundamentally not built for the reality it's trying to process. There is a complete mismatch in capacity.
The scale just shatters. And today, we're looking at a text that argues your brain is exactly like that flimsy plastic scale.
That's a wild comparison.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking the philosophy and theology of Mustafa İslamoğlu.
Yes, a really dense, layered lecture series.
Very dense. And we are going to figure out what happens when the human mind tries to weigh the infinite.
Which is no small task.
Not at all. We are embarking on a deep dive into the very nature of existence, the mechanics of human suffering, the paradox of free will.
Oh, that's a big one.
And even, remarkably, how to survive toxic relatives.
Yes, it gets very practical.
But it all starts with this idea of the shattered scale. Our mission today is to shortcut you, the listener, to the core of these dense arguments and deliver some major aha moments without all the academic overwhelm.
And, you know, it's a terrifying place to start, intellectually speaking.
How so?
Well, because we like to think our mind can conquer anything, right?
Oh, absolutely. We pride ourselves on it.
But in the source material, the speaker draws an incredibly strict, totally uncompromising line between two specific concepts regarding God.
Okay.
And if you cross this line, you break the scale. Those two concepts are Mahayat and Huviyet.
Okay, let's unpack this. Those are heavy terms. What exactly are we looking at with Mahayat and Huviyet?
So think of Mahayat as the absolute essence, the intrinsic nature of God.
A essence.
Right. The whatness, the internal, uncreated, infinite reality.
Okay, got it.
On the other side, you have Huviyet, which refers to identity.
Identity, so the who-ness.
Exactly. The characteristics, the attributes, the way that reality interacts with us. And the speaker makes a definitive, non-negotiable claim right at the beginning.
Which is?
That human beings absolutely, fundamentally cannot comprehend the mahayat, the essence of God. It is a biological and intellectual impossibility.
So this is where our kitchen scale hits the tracks.
Exactly where it hits.
Because our human mind, our intellect, is phenomenal at measuring the physical world.
Oh, it's an incredible tool.
Right. It can calculate the trajectory of a rocket to Mars. It can compose symphonies. It can solve quantum mechanics.
Sure.
But when you try to place the infinite, uncreated essence of the divine onto that same intellectual scale,
the scale cracks.
it just shatters.
Because your intellect is finite.
Yeah.
It has a boundary. It was created.
Right.
You cannot take an uncreated, limitless reality and fit it inside a created, limited container.
That makes logical sense, but...
And the speaker actually uses history to back this up. He pulls in some incredibly profound observations from early Islamic figures who wrestled with this exact problem.
Well, I'm curious how they handled it, because honestly, the idea that there's a wall I just cannot mentally climb over is incredibly frustrating.
The deeply frustrating for the human ego.
We are wired to solve puzzles. If I can't understand the essence of something, my instinct is to just keep hammering at it until I do.
And that instinct is exactly what they warn against. Yeah. There is a famous statement attributed to Abu Bakr, the first caliph. He said, "To comprehend him is to comprehend the inability to comprehend him."
Wait, run that by me one more time. To comprehend him is to comprehend the inability to comprehend him.
That's the one.
Okay, I need a second with that. That is a massive brain twister. It sounds almost like a riddle.
It does, but if you look closely, it's actually a map of human consciousness.
How so?
He's saying that the absolute highest level of intellectual achievement a human being can reach.
An absolute peak.
Right. The peak is arriving at the edge of your own capacity and realizing you cannot go any further.
Wow.
The realization of your own boundary is the only way to realize his limitlessness.
So the failure of the intellect is actually the success of the soul in this framework.
That is a brilliant way to put it, yeah.
The moment the scale breaks, you finally understand how heavy the train actually is.
Exactly. But it goes deeper, and honestly, it gets much more serious.
Okay, I'm braced.
The source brings in a quote from Umar, the second caliph, who takes this from a philosophical observation to a really stark warning.
A warning about what?
Umar stated that obsessively searching for the secret of God's essence is actually tantamount to shirk.
Wait, shirk, meaning idolatry.
Yes.
How do we get from trying to figure out how God works to worshiping a golden calf? That seems like a massive leap.
I know, it seems like a leap until you unpack the mechanics of what happens in your brain when you try to define the infinite.
Okay, walk me through it.
Think about what happens when you finally, quote unquote, understand a concept. You wrap your mind around it, right?
Right. I put it in a box. I label it.
You draw mental borders around it so you can categorize it. Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you think you have put the essence of God into a mental box, what have you actually done?
Oh.
You haven't captured God. You've just created a mental idol.
Because God can't fit in a box.
Right. You've shrunk the infinite down to a manageable, finite shape that fits neatly inside your human skull.
Oh.
At that point, you are no longer worshiping the true, limitless creator. You are worshiping a construction of your own limited imagination.
That is...
You've basically bowed down to your own intellect.
I see it now. It's like you're worshiping the reflection of the sun in a puddle and convincing yourself you hold the actual sun.
That is a perfect analogy.
Because an infinite God that I can completely understand isn't infinite at all. It's just a really smart human idea.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And there's a 19th century poet the speaker references, Zia Pasha, who captured this perfectly.
What did he say?
He wrote, "This small mind doesn't need to comprehend the high meanings, because this scale cannot bear this much weight."
He literally uses the imagery of the scale.
He does. It's an acknowledgement of absurdity. The intellect is an instrument made by the creator.
Right.
How can the instrument weigh the one who designed the concept of weight itself?
It can't.
Exactly. The speaker says that when you truly internalize this, you don't keep trying to do the math. You just say, God is great, and you tremble. You let the awe wash over you.
I get the awe. I really do. But practically speaking, isn't that just leaving us in the dark?
In what way?
Well, if the ultimate essence is a locked door that I'm biologically incapable of opening, what's the point? Are we just supposed to wander around blindly?
And that is the beauty of this theological framework. You aren't left in the dark at all.
Okay, good.
Remember the second word we talked about earlier?
Huviet. The identity.
Right. While the essence, the mahayet, is totally inaccessible, the identity is generously, abundantly provided.
Okay, so how is it provided if we can't access the essence?
Through the Esma-ul Husna, which translates to the beautiful names of God.
Ah, the names.
Yes. The speaker calls these names a ladder to the sky.
A ladder to the sky, I like that.
You can't grasp the essence of God, but you are given names like the merciful, the just, the sustainer, the knowing.
Yeah.
These names are a divine descent. It's the infinite choosing to introduce himself to the finite, using a language that the finite brain can actually process and interact with.
It's like, okay, I can't stare directly into the core of the sun. If I do, I go blind.
Exactly.
The sheer energy destroys my retinas. That's the essence. But I can feel the warmth of the sun on my skin.
Yes.
I can see the light it casts on the trees. I can study how it makes plants grow. I am interacting with the identity, the attributes of the sun, without needing to stand inside its core. The names are the sunlight.
That is a phenomenal parallel. The names allow you to have a relationship with the infinite without being destroyed by the paradox of it.
It's a safety mechanism almost.
It is. And this strict boundary, this understanding that God is entirely distinct from our created reality, leads the speaker into a really fascinating breakdown of the universe.
Let's get into it.
Well, if God is this uncreated, necessary essence, then what are we? What is the microphone in front of you? What is a galaxy?
Right, this moves us from theology into ontology, right? The philosophical study of what it means to actually exist.
Exactly.
And the speaker categorizes literally everything that can be thought of into three massive buckets. These are the three tiers of reality.
The Meritibi Vikud, yes.
Let's walk through them, listener, because they set up this incredibly tight logical trap later on when we get to the concept of atheism.
Okay, so the first bucket of existence is called Vasibul Vikud. This translates to necessary existence.
Necessary existence.
Yes, and this category contains only God. The definition of necessary existence is a reality that is completely independent, eternal, and its existence is not borrowed from or contingent on anything else.
It must exist.
It must. And the speaker makes this really sharp point about this category. He says, if you exist to think about it, he necessarily exists.
Meaning, the very fact that a subjective, questioning mind is currently operating is the downstream proof of an uncaused necessary cause.
Yes, you thinking is the proof, which leads perfectly into the second bucket, mumkunur vukud.
Possible existence.
Right. Possible existence. This is where you and I live. This is the microphone, the trees, the planets, the entire observable universe.
Why is it called possible existence?
Because it didn't have to exist. There is no logical necessity for a tree or a human or a star to be here. There was a time when all of this did not exist, and there is a time when it might not exist again.
Right, it's temporary.
Everything in this bucket is completely dependent. Its existence is borrowed.
Borrowed from the first bucket.
Exactly. According to the text, it exists purely because of the divine command of be the kun. It's a contingent reality. It relies entirely on the necessary existence to sustain it every single second.
Okay, so bucket one is the necessary creator. Bucket two is the possible creation.
Right.
But bucket three is where my brain completely stalled out when I was reading the source.
Ah, yes. Muha il vukud.
Right. Impossible existence.
Yes.
The speaker defines this bucket as absolute, total nothingness, non-existence. But I have to push back here on behalf of anyone listening who is trying to map this out logically.
Go for it.
If absolute nothingness is literally impossible, then how do we have a phrase for it? Why is there a bucket for it?
It's a great question.
How are you and I sitting here, breathing air, drinking coffee, and having a verbal conversation about absolute nothingness right now if it fundamentally cannot exist?
And you have just walked directly into the speaker's trap.
I figured I might have.
That friction you are feeling right now is exactly what he uses to dismantle the entire concept of absolute atheism. Let's slow down and really look at what happens when you try to talk about nothingness.
Okay, let's dissect it. I'm ready.
To even articulate the phrase, absolute nothingness is impossible, what tools are you currently using?
Well, I'm using my vocal cords. I'm using the English language. I'm using my brain to conceptualize the sentence before I say it.
Exactly. You are using a thinking mind. You are using a biological brain powered by calories and oxygen.
Right.
You are using a socially agreed upon linguistic framework. The very act of declaring nothingness requires a massive, complex architecture of somethingness.
I can't talk about a void without building a platform to stand on first.
Precisely. The speaker argues that absolute nothingness is a logical fallacy the moment it interacts with human consciousness.
Why is that?
Because the very second you conceive of nothingness, you have given it a mental existence.
Oh, wow.
You are present, reality is present, your neurons are firing. Therefore, absolute nothingness has already been defeated by your own presence.
It's dead on arrival.
Yes.
Yes.
You cannot experience nothingness because the experience itself is something.
Okay, my mind is slightly melting, but I'm following. How does he apply this to atheism? Because an atheist isn't necessarily arguing for a void, they're arguing against a specific deity.
He takes this exact mechanism of thought and applies it to absolute atheism, calling it an intellectual paradox.
That paradox.
Yeah. He argues that what we term atheism is technically just denial, and the mechanics of denial are fundamentally flawed.
How so?
Think about the physical act of denying something. If you say, God doesn't exist, what is the very first thing your brain has to do to make that sentence make sense?
Well, I have to know what the word God means. I have to pull up the definition.
Yes. You have to construct the mental concept of God in your mind.
I have to build the idol, so to speak.
Exactly. You have to define the parameters of the entity you are rejecting. You cannot reject a blank, undefined space.
Right.
You have to draw a picture, point at it, and say, that isn't real.
Right. If I say, unicorns don't exist, I'm not thinking of nothing. I'm actively picturing a horse with a horn and then mentally crossing it out.
Exactly. So by forming the concept, God already possesses a mental existence within you. You name him, and then you deny him.
That is wild.
The speaker is pointing out an inescapable tautology. You are stating the name of something you claim has no name and no existence.
It's an absurdity.
It is. You're essentially saying the thing that is not is not. But by giving it a title, by defining it in order to reject it, you've given it a shadow of reality in your own cognitive framework.
You've invited it into the room.
Exactly. The concept is inescapable. You cannot evict the concept of the necessary existence from the architecture of human thought, because thought itself is contingent upon existence.
That is a staggering realization. The very friction of denying it proves that the concept occupies space in your reality.
Right.
You can't fight a ghost without acknowledging the room the ghost is standing in.
Beautifully said.
Which actually brings us to a brilliant pivot the speaker makes. He takes these massive cosmic ideas of existence and grounds them in how our brains process everyday objects.
Yes, this is where it gets very practical.
He gives us this amazing breakdown using something as simple as water.
This is where the deep dive bridges high-level ontology with cognitive philosophy. The speaker wants to explain how a thing exists to us in our daily lives.
Okay.
He outlines 3 manifestations of any object. When you interact with the world, you are dealing with 3 simultaneous realities.
What are they?
First is harichi, or hakiki, which is the physical, external reality, then zini, which is the mental reality, and final lafsi, which is the verbal or linguistic reality.
Okay, listener, let's play a game with this because I think this is one of the most practical tools in the entire lecture.
It really clarifies things.
Imagine you are stranded in the middle of a blazing desert. The sun is beating down, you are severely dehydrated, your throat is like sandpaper.
A terrible situation.
What you desperately need in that moment is the harichi reality of water. The physical, external reality.
Yes.
The actual, literal H2O molecules. That physical reality is the only thing that will chemically quench your thirst and keep you alive.
Correct. That is the objective truth of the object in the physical world.
Right.
Now, let's look at the third reality, the lafsi, the verbal reality.
The word itself.
Right. If you are dying of thirst in that desert and you start hallucinating and screaming for help, if you are an English speaker, the sound that comes out of your mouth is water. But if you are an Arabic speaker, you yell ma. A Persian speaker cries out ab. A Turkish speaker says su.
The sounds are completely different. The shape your mouth makes is different.
Because verbal reality is completely subjective. It changes wildly across cultures, geographies, and centuries.
It's just a label.
It is just an agreed-upon noise that a group of humans uses to point at something.
And this is the crucial middle step that the speaker focuses on, no matter what subjective noise you make, no matter what linguistic reality you inhabit. The zini, the mental reality of water, never changes. The exact moment the Englishman says water and the Turk says su, the exact same image flashes in both of their minds.
The image.
Right, the abstract concept, the concept of a clear, cool liquid. The mental reality is a universal human constant, unaffected by geography or language.
Yes. The physical reality doesn't change, and the mental reality doesn't change. Only the superficial label changes.
That makes perfect sense.
But the speaker also notes a vital limitation here, and it's a profound point.
What's the limitation?
Simply possessing the mental reality of water, being able to close your eyes in that desert and vividly, perfectly imagine a cold, sweating glass of ice water will not cure your physical thirst.
Oh, right.
Having the concept in your brain does not replace the physical consequence of reality.
Right. Mental existence is powerful, but it doesn't hydrate your cells. Now, why does the speaker spend so much time on this linguistics lesson?
It's the setup.
Because he maps it directly onto our spiritual reality, and it completely blew my mind. He basically asks the audience this question.
It's a huge question.
If saying the word water instantly brings the properties of water to your mind, the wetness, the coolness, the relief, what is supposed to happen in your mind when you say the word Allah?
That is the pivotal question of the entire text. When you utter that specific verbal reality, what mental reality is supposed to flood your consciousness.
For a lot of people, unfortunately, it's just an empty sonic placeholder.
It's just a word they say out of habit.
Like saying, or like. It has no weight.
Exactly. But the speaker argues that uttering the name should instantly trigger a cascading realization of the Esma, the attributes.
The names we talked about earlier.
Yes. When you say the word, your mental reality should be instantly flooded with the understanding of the merciful, the just, the sustainer, the creator.
And he unpacks a really fascinating linguistic nuance here regarding the name Allah itself, separating it from the other names.
He does. He points out that Allah is a proper noun. In Arabic grammar, it's an ism ihaz.
Meaning it's unique.
It describes nothing else. It is entirely, exclusively unique to the necessary existence. Every other name we use in theology, the merciful, the knowing, the great, these are all attributes.
Adjectives, basically.
They are adjectives that describe the proper noun. He references a very famous theological list compiled by the scholar Tirmidhi, which is traditionally known throughout the Islamic world as the 99 names of God.
Right, the famous 99 names. You see them written in calligraphy, people memorize them.
But the speaker makes a critical philosophical distinction that shifts how we view this list.
What's the shift?
He says it's not actually a list of 99, it is functionally a list of 100.
Okay, where does the 100th come in?
There are 99 attributes, making the proper noun Allah the ultimate 100th name.
Oh, wow.
It is the core that encompasses, binds, and holds all 99 of those disparate attributes together in perfect unity.
That is beautiful. When you invoke the 100th name, you aren't just making a sound. You are simultaneously pulling the gravitational weight of all 99 attributes into your mental reality.
Yes. So when your brain attempts to process the divine, it shouldn't just hit a blank wall of impossible to understand essence.
It shouldn't just be the shattered scale.
Exactly. Your mental reality should be illuminated by the 99 attributes. It is the ladder we talked about earlier.
The ladder to the sky.
The names give shape and texture to the mental reality, bridging the gap between our finite, limited minds and the infinite reality of the Creator.
Okay, so we have built this massive framework of how to think about God's existence, how our language works, and how our minds process reality.
It's a huge foundation.
But we have to pivot now. Because philosophy is great when you're sitting in a comfortable chair, drinking a coffee, contemplating the universe.
Sure.
But what happens when the universe hits back? What happens when you get a terrifying medical diagnosis? What happens when you lose your job or someone you love dies?
That's the real test.
Right. This brings us to a major shift in the deep dive. Theodicy. The problem of pain.
This is where the theology has to prove its worth. If it only works in a classroom, it's useless.
Exactly.
The speaker issues a massive warning here about how human beings naturally react to suffering. He says we are asking the why questions completely wrong.
How so?
We have a fundamentally flawed methodology for interrogating our own pain.
What is the wrong way to ask why?
He warns against asking theological questions from the top down.
Top down meaning starting with God's perspective.
Exactly. Asking questions like, why did God do this to me? What is God's plan in allowing this tragedy? Why would a merciful God create this situation?
Which are the most natural questions to ask?
They are, but the speaker equates this approach to trying to write a postdoctoral thesis before you have even attended first grade.
Ouch.
He argues that if you start from the transcendent, the absolute, the uncreated essence, you are completely ignoring your own limits.
You're jumping past the ladder.
Right. You are trying to drag the infinite down into the courtroom of your finite mind to interrogate it.
But
You're putting the train back on the plastic scale.
because I don't have the data set to understand cosmic eternal variables, I only see my little sliver of time.
Precisely.
So if top-down is the wrong approach, what is the alternative? How am I supposed to process grief or hardship?
You must start from the bottom up. You must start from the physical world, from what you can actually observe, touch, and measure.
Start small.
You start from the effect and work your way to the cause. He traces this beautiful, grounded logic using the physical environment.
Hear it.
He tells the audience, look at a glass on your table. Where does it come from? It comes from sand, from the earth. Where does the earth come from? It comes from cooling magma. Where does magma come from? Ash, carbon.
Tracing it all the way back.
He walks the listener systematically backward down the chain of physical reality to the foundational building blocks of the universe.
This leads to the carbon analogy, which is easily one of the most striking parts of this entire lecture.
It's unforgettable.
He points out something scientifically true but metaphorically devastating. He says coal is basically just carbon, and a diamond is also carbon.
Right.
The fundamental foundational ingredient of both objects is absolutely identical. So what is the only difference between a dirty lump of coal that you shovel into a furnace to be burned to ash and a flawless, brilliant diamond that you set into a crown?
Intense, crushing, unimaginable, agonizing pressure over a long period of time.
Now, I want to pause here. I really want to push back on this on behalf of anyone listening right now who is going through hell.
Please do.
Because I kind of hate the pressure makes diamonds cliche. You see it on motivational posters. You see it in corporate seminars when they're laying people off. Hey, pressure makes diamonds.
Yeah, it can feel very hollow.
It feels cheap. It feels dismissive. What does that actually mean for the person whose life is currently falling apart? To them, it doesn't feel like they are becoming a diamond. It just feels like being crushed in the dark.
It's a very fair critique.
How does the speaker rescue this from just being a cheap Instagram quote?
He rescues it by tying it to profound human history and the concept of consent. He doesn't treat it as a corporate slogan. He treats it as the bleeding edge of the human experience.
Okay, how?
He references a historical figure named Bilal from the very early, heavily persecuted days of Islam.
Right.
Bilal was an enslaved man in Mecca. When he accepted the new faith, his enslavers subjected him to horrific, unthinkable physical torture.
Just brutal stuff.
He was dragged into the blazing desert heat, pinned to the burning sand, and massive crushing boulders were placed on his chest to force him to recant.
Literal, physical, crushing pressure.
Yes. And the speaker frames Bilal's story not just as a historical tragedy of abuse, but as a profound spiritual transformation.
Okay.
Bilal endured that crushing pressure. He refused to break, and he emerged as one of the most revered figures in Islamic history. He became a diamond.
Wow.
The speaker elevates the metaphor by framing human suffering as a terrifying, intimate, divine question.
A question.
When you are under that immense pressure, whether it's illness, loss, or betrayal, it is as if the divine artisan is leaning in and asking you directly, do you want to remain coal or do you want to become a diamond?
Wow. Do you want to remain coal or do you want to become a diamond?
That is heavy.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly difficult to hear when you are the one under the boulder.
It is the hardest pill to swallow in the entire theological framework because the speaker suggests something deeply uncomfortable.
What's that?
To complain about the pressure, to scream, why me? Why is this happening? Take this heavy burden away, is essentially to beg God to let you remain coal.
You are effectively saying, please relieve this pressure. I prefer to be ordinary. I prefer to be combustible. I prefer not to be transformed.
I'm complaining about the process of becoming a diamond. I consent to being coal.
Exactly.
That is a brutal, brutal mirror to hold up to our own complaints. I mean, we all want the resilience. We all want the wisdom and the depth that comes from surviving hardship, but none of us want the actual hardship.
Right. We want the diamond without the pressure. But the universe doesn't work that way.
It really doesn't.
This perspective shifts the entire paradigm of hardship. It's no longer viewed as arbitrary punishment or cosmic bad luck. It is a terrifyingly intense forging process.
The necessary existence shaping the possible existence.
Exactly. And the text argues that the realization of this process, that God is the ultimate artisan and we are the raw material, should lead to a state of awe, right?
Right. When we look at the end result from the bottom up, when we look at the resilience of someone who has survived trauma with grace, we don't ask why with bitterness.
We look at the diamond and we say, mashallah, God has willed it.
We marvel at the craftsmanship.
We move logically from the effect to the transformed human to the cause, the divine pressure. We move from the art to the artist.
But that begs a massive, unavoidable question.
I know exactly where you're going.
If we are just the raw material, the carbon, being subjected to pressure by the divine artisan, are we just completely passive? Do we have any say in this process? Are we just sitting there waiting to see if we get lucky enough to be crushed into diamonds or if we just get burned to ash in the furnace?
The ultimate question.
This drives us right into the heart of the oldest, most fiercely debated philosophical topic in human history: free will versus divine destiny.
The speaker transitions into this beautifully via a Q&A section from his audience. He is specifically answering a seemingly mundane question about marriage.
A marriage question, really.
Yeah. A listener essentially asks, when I choose a spouse, when I sign the marriage contract, am I making that choice with my own free will, which theology calls Kuzi Arayed minor will, or is it entirely God's grand design Kuli Arayed absolute will?
The ultimate, is it A or B question. Is it my fault, or is it written in the stars? And what does the speaker say?
He says it is completely symmetrical. It is both.
Both? How does that work?
He uses a brilliant, deeply intuitive metaphor to explain how these two seemingly contradictory forces can coexist perfectly without canceling each other out.
The train analogy. I love this part. Let's really map this out for the listeners.
It's such a good visual.
Imagine your life, your human will, your daily choices as a passenger on a moving train. Inside the cabins of that train, you have total, uninhibited freedom.
Complete freedom.
You can get up, you can walk to the dining car, you can sit by the window, you can move 10 cars forward or 5 cars back, you can choose what to eat, you can choose who to talk to, you can choose to sleep.
Yes.
Your Kuziraid, your minor human will, is 100% fully active and responsible within the confines of that environment.
The divine will, the Kuli Arayed, is the train itself. The train is moving on its laid tracks, inexorably, powered by an unstoppable engine toward its final designed destination. Your movement back and forth within the cars, your micro-choices, do not alter the fundamental macro trajectory of the train.
Wow.
The absolute will completely encompasses the finite will. You are free within the boundary of your destiny.
Okay, the visual makes total sense, but how does that actually work in practice? If the train is inevitably going where it's going, why bother walking to a different car?
Right, the fatalist trap.
Yeah, why make any choices at all? If my destiny is written, shouldn't I just sit in my seat and wait? The speaker introduces another analogy here that cuts right through that fatalistic mindset: the half-open door.
Yes, and this is where he tackles the danger of laziness disguised as piety.
Laziness disguised as piety. I love that phrasing.
The speaker asks a simple question. If you are sitting in a room and a door is left slightly ajar, do you just sit on the couch, lean back, fold your hands, and pray for a gust of wind to blow it wide open for you?
No. If I want to leave the room, I have to get off the couch, walk over to the door, physically put my hand on the wood, and exert force to push it open.
Precisely. And this is where the speaker profoundly redefines the concept of gratitude as it applies to the gift of free will.
How so?
We normally think of gratitude as a feeling or just saying the words thank you. But in this ethical framework, true gratitude for a blessing is utilizing that blessing according to its intended nature.
He gives some really clear examples of this. He says the gratitude for wealth isn't just hoarding it and saying, thank God I'm rich. True gratitude for wealth is spending it to help others.
Exactly.
The gratitude for physical health is using your functioning body to do good work. The gratitude for knowledge is the act of teaching it to someone else. The gratitude is the action.
And therefore, he argues, the gratitude for having free will is the act of making a choice.
Making a choice.
It is actively desiring, deciding, planning, and striving. The speaker uses the Arabic term istishara, seeking counsel, making an intense effort. If you don't actively try to push that half-open door, you are being profoundly ungrateful for the mechanism of free will you've been given. You are failing to exercise your Kuzi Arayed.
You want him to will it, but you haven't willed it yourself.
Exactly.
You are demanding that the train reach the best possible destination without you even bothering to buy a ticket, walk to the station, or board the car. You have to exhaust every single physical and mental effort available to you.
You have to try.
You have to push the door. If you want a good grade, you have to study for the test. If you want a good marriage, you have to go to therapy and communicate. You can't just pray for a good marriage while ignoring your spouse.
Action is a prerequisite for surrender. The speaker is very clear. Only after you have exhausted every physical, mental, and emotional effort. Only when you have pushed that door with all your might until your muscles burn and it simply will not budge.
Right.
Or when the train arrives at a station you didn't anticipate despite all your careful planning. Only then does true spiritual surrender begin.
That is the turning point.
Yes. Then and only then, you say, I used the will. You gave me to its absolute biological and intellectual limit, and this is the outcome you designed. I submit.
Beautiful.
That is the perfect harmony of free will and destiny. Surrender without effort is just laziness disguised as piety.
I'm going to repeat that because it needs to be burned into our memories. Surrender without effort is laziness disguised as piety. That is incredible.
It really hits hard.
And this idea of action, of moving, of striving, of not just sitting stagnant on the couch bridges us perfectly to the next major theme of the deep dive.
A very practical theme.
The speaker shifts gears from these internal cosmic battles of the soul and brings everything down to the dirt. He moves to community ethics. How do we actually interact with the physical people around us?
What is genuinely fascinating here is how he takes two very practical, seemingly unrelated, mundane elements from the religious text to make a massive, piercing critique of modern society.
What are the two elements?
He discusses the etiquette of volunteering for the Korban, the ritual sacrifice during the holiday of Eid, and then he discusses the microscopic etiquette of dealing with beggars on the street.
Okay, let's start with the Korban volunteering, because at first glance, talking about organizing a charity meat drive seems like a weird detour after talking about the essence of God and the cosmos.
Yeah.
Why does he bring this up?
He brings it up to diagnose a modern epidemic that he sees ravaging society: loneliness and the total evaporation of community belonging.
Wow, okay.
He argues that our modern inability to work together, to sweat together, to get our hands dirty for a shared communal cause has created a generation that lives entirely alone and will ultimately die alone.
He attributes this to a specific kind of modern individualism, doesn't he? He critiques a type of humanism where man is positioned as the absolute center and measure of all things, completely cut off from the divine and from community obligation.
Yes. He says that when you have no community, when you have no shared cause larger than your own immediate comfort, everything becomes inherently selfish.
Right.
He paints a really bleak picture. Selfish joys, selfish sorrows, selfish wealth. Even your sadness becomes isolated and useless.
Selfish sorrows? That's haunting.
If you are only ever crying about your own problems, your tears don't water anything. It's a tragic diagnosis of the modern condition. We are all sitting in our own heavily fortified little bubbles, hoarding our experiences, terrified of being inconvenienced by other people.
And he contrasts this hoarding mindset by returning to our favorite metaphor, water.
It always comes back to water.
He says that knowledge, resources, and human energy are a trust. They aren't yours to keep. If water flows, if it moves aggressively over rocks, through streams, churning and sharing itself with the environment, it becomes crystal clear.
The Turkish word he uses is belirlaşıyor. It purifies itself.
It purifies itself through the friction of movement and sharing. But what happens if water is hoarded? What happens if you build a dam and keep it in a stagnant pool?
It rots, it grows algae, it becomes toxic to drink. He argues that happiness and purity of soul are derived entirely from sacrifice for others, from flowing outward. They are never derived from self-indulgence or isolation.
Which brings us to the two doubly practical and frankly extreme examples of how this flowing water looks in daily interactions. The first is an incredible story about the prophet, and the speaker basically gives us a lesson in chemical physics.
This is a brilliant illustration. The speaker recounts a specific time when the prophet asked his closest companions to take a pledge.
What was the pledge?
And the pledge was simply, never be a burden on others. But the specific example used to illustrate this pledge is wild.
Yeah, it's very specific.
The prophet said that if you are riding atop a camel and you accidentally drop your riding whip to the ground, you do not ask the person walking on the ground next to you to pick it up and hand it back to you.
Like, to a modern ear, that sounds almost unhinged, sounds unnecessarily strict and rigid. Like, come on, the guy is right there.
That's right.
He's standing next to the whip. It takes him 2 seconds to bend over and hand it to me. Why on earth would I not just ask for a tiny favor?
It seems like common courtesy almost.
But the speaker spends several minutes vividly detailing exactly why this command is so heavy by explaining the highly structured, laborious mechanics of a camel.
He paints such a vivid picture.
Yeah.
Camels, Devler, are massive, complex, temperamental creatures. When a camel needs to sit down, it is not like a dog just playfully dropping to its haunches.
No, it's a whole process.
It is a major event. It takes minutes. The camel has to inspect the ground. It folds its front legs in a jarring mechanical motion, then its back legs, shifting its massive weight in a multi-stage process.
Right.
It grunts, it groans, and getting back up is just as violent, jerky, and time-consuming.
Right. So the prophet is saying to his companions, even if it means you have to initiate this massive, exhausting 5-minute mechanical process of forcing this huge beast to sit down in the dirt, even if you have to dismount, bend over, pick up your own whip, climb back on, and then force the beast through the violent process of standing back up. Do it. Endure all of that massive inconvenience rather than impose a 2-second favor on the person walking next to you.
The underlying ethical lesson is profound.
Yeah.
Carry your own weight. Do not view the people around you as instruments for your personal convenience. Protect the dignity of others by refusing to be a burden on them, no matter how small the imposition seems to you.
It's an extreme demand for self-reliance. But then, true to form, he pairs this extreme self-reliance with an equally extreme command regarding how we treat the vulnerable. He flips the script.
He does. He references Surah Ad-Duha and the specific etiquette of dealing with beggars on the street. He creates a fascinating tension.
Explain the tension.
While you are strictly commanded never to be a burden on anyone else, you are simultaneously commanded never to scold or demean those who are a burden on you.
He specifically says, do not scold beggars, even if you think they might be running a scam, even if they approach you at a bad time and annoy you. He references the Quranic principle that offering a kind word to someone is vastly superior to giving them charity, but following it up with an injury, a lecture, or an insult.
And he shares a really powerful cultural phrase from his youth regarding those who beg, verde de versenlor.
What does that mean?
Which roughly translates to give so that they, meaning the divine, may give to you. He argues a radical point here.
Go on.
You shouldn't necessarily give your money because you have perfectly audited the beggar, run a background check, and deemed them morally worthy of your coin.
Right, you're not an investigator.
You give for the sake of the divine name that they are invoking when they ask. You give to keep the cycle of generosity flowing. You give to keep the water from stagnating.
It's a dual framework that feels almost impossible to perfectly balance. Demand total, uncompromising self-reliance from yourself, but extend limitless, unquestioning grace to others.
It's a very high bar.
And honestly, it sounds beautiful in theory. It sounds very poetic when we are talking about dropping a whip or handing a coin to a stranger you'll never see again. But the speaker gets hit with a question from the audience that brings this lofty philosophy crashing violently down into the gritty, painful reality of family drama.
Yes, we move into applied virtue.
Yeah.
A listener submits a genuinely heart-wrenching question during the session. She describes dealing with incredibly toxic in-laws.
Oh, boy.
She says they constantly slander her, they ostracize her from family events, they accuse her of terrible things behind her back, despite her constant, exhaustive efforts to be kind to them over the years.
That is so exhausting.
She says she is physically shaking with anxiety when she has to be in the same room as them. And she asks the speaker, quite simply, do I still have to see them? Do I still have to be good to them after everything they've done?
And this is where the rubber meets the road for this entire deep dive. Because it is one thing to be kind to a beggar on the street for 5 seconds. It is an entirely different universe of difficulty to sit across the Thanksgiving dinner table from someone who is actively, maliciously trying to destroy your peace of mind.
It takes a totally different kind of strength.
The speaker's answer to this woman is an absolute masterclass in ethical philosophy.
He doesn't give her a simple yes or no. Instead, he breaks down the entire ethical framework of human goodness into 2 distinct categories. He tells her she needs to understand why she is being good.
Okay, what are the categories?
The first category he defines is hisabi. This translates to transactional goodness. Doing good because there's a calculation, a ledger, a mathematical equation involved.
Like, I will be nice to you because you are my mother-in-law and society says I have to be.
Right.
Or I will be nice to you because you bought me a nice gift last week, so now I owe you a smile. It's a trade.
Exactly. And the speaker is actually quite harsh about this level of ethics. He calls hisabi goodness inherently selfish and suggests it borders on being unethical.
Why unethical?
Because the goodness is entirely contingent on the recipient. You aren't doing good because you actually love goodness. You are just paying a social invoice. You are acting like an accountant, not a moral agent.
So what is the alternative? If transactional goodness is bad, what's left?
The alternative, the higher tier, is HASB. This translates to inherent goodness.
Inherent goodness.
It means doing good purely because the act of goodness itself is beautiful, completely, regardless of the recipient's behavior, their status, or their toxic attitude toward you. You do good because you are fundamentally good, not because they are good.
Okay, I have to stop you here. I have to push back hard on this.
I figured you might.
Because if I am that woman listening to this advice, I am furious. Isn't this just giving people a theological permission slip to treat you like a doormat?
It can definitely sound like that at first.
If someone is toxic, abusive, and slandering me, and your philosophical advice is I must continually show them inherent goodness no matter what, aren't you just enabling their toxicity? Aren't you just demanding that I be a victim?
It's the natural objection, and the speaker anticipates this exact pushback. His counter-argument completely flips the psychological power dynamic of the situation.
Okay, flip it for me.
He argues that returning good for evil is not a sign of weakness or submission. It is the ultimate display of psychological dominance and bravery.
Really?
He uses a specific cultural term, erkishi, which translates to a brave, valiant person, and he explicitly notes that this courage applies entirely regardless of gender. It is an internal fortitude. It is a fortress.
But I need to understand why it's brave to let someone insult you and smile back. How does that work mechanically?
It works because of what the speaker calls the economics of goodness and evil. The speaker states a profound rule. Every single evil act, every piece of slander, every petty, passive-aggressive comment at the dinner table is effectively an advertisement or propaganda for evil.
An advertisement.
When someone acts toxic towards you, they are essentially trying to recruit you into their miserable reality. They want to trigger you. They want you to respond with your own toxicity. They want you to yell back so they can prove to themselves that the world is just as nasty and transactional as they believe it is.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Every evil act is a marketing campaign for evil. They want you to buy their product.
Yes. So when you absorb that toxicity, when you feel the sting of the insult, but you consciously choose to return HASB inherent goodness, you are fundamentally disrupting their marketing campaign.
They're not buying it.
You are flooding the market with goodness. You are intentionally putting goodness into circulation to combat the propaganda of evil. You aren't being a doormat. You are an active resistance fighter against the spread of malice.
Wow.
You are refusing to let their internal rot dictate your internal weather. You retain total control of your own reactions.
That completely changes the framing. It takes the power completely away from the toxic person. You aren't being kind to toxic relatives because they deserve it. They don't.
No, they don't.
You are being kind because goodness deserves to be put into the world, and you refuse to be a vehicle for their bitterness. You refuse to let them turn you into a bitter person.
Exactly. You are protecting your own essence. Now, before we wrap up, it is crucial to understand that the speaker doesn't just apply this framework of inherent reality and systemic truth to personal, micro-level family disputes.
Oh, he goes bigger.
He believes this is a universal law. He applies it uniformly, even to massive, macro-level geopolitical issues. And it's fascinating how he maps this theology onto political systems.
Yes, and we should mention here, listener, whether you lean left or right, whether you agree with his politics or not, what we are looking at is the absolute logic consistency of his framework.
We're just supporting the text here.
Exactly. He applies the exact same logic of systems versus surface-level labels to global politics as he does to the kitchen scale and the concept of water.
In the source text, an audience member asks the speaker for his thoughts on Barack Obama's presidency. The speaker responds by arguing that focusing on the personal identity, the charisma, or the race of a political leader is missing the point entirely.
Why is that?
He uses the term Leviathan and references the concept of a deep state or systemic machine, arguing that systemic policies are what truly matter, not the individual who is currently serving as the symbolic head of that system.
He argues that the ultimate litmus test for whether a system has actually fundamentally changed is not the demographics of the leader, but the application of the policy.
Right.
He specifically points to the Palestinian issue as his primary metric for this. If the underlying systemic approach to that issue remains unchanged, he views the change in leadership as functionally irrelevant. It's just changing the verbal label without changing the physical reality.
It perfectly mirrors his earlier point about Hasabi versus Hasbi, and Harichi physical versus Zini mental reality.
It's remarkably consistent.
He is entirely focused on the underlying systemic reality, the essence of the action, rather than the superficial label or the individual's identity. He applies his philosophical framework consistently, starting from the intimate micro level of family dynamics and scaling it all the way up to macro global politics.
It really is a sweeping, comprehensive way to view the entire world. It's a complete operating system for reality. And that brings us to the end of this incredible arc. We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started with the absurdity of trying to weigh a freight train on a plastic kitchen scale, recognizing the profound necessary limits of our own minds in the face of the infinite essence of God.
We traveled through the logical trap of atheism, understanding how the very act of thinking and denying proves the necessity of existence. We learned that the name Allah isn't just a verbal sound, but a mental trigger designed to flood the mind with 99 attributes of perfection.
We looked closely at the crushing, agonizing pressure of human suffering. And we reframed it not as a random punishment from a distant dictator, but as the intimate bottom-up process of the divine artisan, asking if we consent to turning our carbon into diamonds.
We explored the train of free will, realizing that our gratitude for choice isn't just a feeling, but the action of actively pushing the doors open, exhausting every ounce of our effort before truly submitting to destiny.
And we brought it all the way down to earth, to the gritty daily reality of community and family. From the grueling mechanics of a camel standing up to teach us self-reliance, to the profound, aggressive bravery of returning inherent Haspi goodness to toxic people, just to disrupt their marketing and flood the market with light.
Ultimately, the entire text is a call to move from a stagnant, isolated pool of self-interest to a flowing, crystal-clear river of shared existence.
Thank you for taking this journey with us, listener. I know we asked a lot of your mental scale today. The pursuit of understanding is indeed the ultimate flowing water. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought that builds on everything we've unpacked.
Leave him with something heavy.
The speaker mentioned that every single action is an advertisement. Every act of cruelty is a billboard for malice, and every act of kindness is a commercial for grace. If your life is a billboard, and every reaction you have to stress, to annoyance, to the slow driver cutting you off in traffic, to the passive-aggressive relative at the dinner table, if every single one of those reactions is a marketing campaign, what exactly is your life currently selling to the people around you? Until next time, keep diving deep.
In today's critique, we're examining a transcript from a rich, conceptually dense religious lecture exploring the divine names of God, the nature of existence, and practical spiritual guidance. The sudden shift from profound ontological classifications to mundane community announcements abruptly disrupts the reader's spiritual immersion.
Yeah, the weakness here really stems from the extreme contrast in the source material's tone. I mean, the text establishes a deeply abstract intellectual atmosphere right out of the gate.
Right.
You've got the reader immersed in the three levels of existence, moving from Vapsi vil wujud, which is absolute necessary existence,
down through Mumkin il wujud, the contingent existence.
Exactly, and finally to Muhal al wujud, the impossible existence. And that requires some heavy, transcendent philosophical lifting from the audience.
It really does.
But then the text abruptly drops this elevated tone entirely to deliver administrative updates. We're suddenly reading about a Qurban organization, 600 volunteers, 65 expert butchers, and a highly specific recommendation for a Siraj magnetic bed in Fundiksade.
It feels like watching a profound indie drama that is suddenly interrupted by a very loud commercial break for local services. I mean, the spell is broken entirely.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the author spends the first half of the material meticulously building this sanctuary for the mind. They use that intricate water analogy to explain the layers of reality.
Right, highlighting how water exists physically as a liquid.
Yeah, and mentally as a concept that doesn't quench your thirst just by thinking about it. And then, linguistically, as varying words depending on your tongue. The reader is fully locked into this contemplative state.
Realizing the limits of the human mind and grasping the essence of the divine.
Exactly. So, delivering pure logistics in the very next breath causes this intense psychological whiplash.
Well, this happens frequently when live lectures are adapted into text.
Yeah, for sure.
Because in a room, a speaker can use a pause, a shift in posture, or a change in vocal register to signal a transition into housekeeping.
But on the page, without those physical cues,
the collision of absolute theology and magnetic mattresses is just jarring. So the suggestion here is to create a thematic, philosophical bridge that connects the highly abstract theological concepts established in the first half directly to the practical acts of the community in the second half.
Got it. So they don't just cut the announcements out.
No, the author does not need to delete the announcements. The goal is to elevate them to match the intellectual room they are being spoken in.
Okay, so a concrete way to execute that on the page is to use the previously established concept of zichni warlik.
The mental existence.
Right, the mental existence we just touched on regarding the water analogy. You use that to frame the community updates.
That makes sense.
The author could frame the collective sacrifice and the gathering of the 600 volunteers as creating a lasting mental reality of brotherhood, one that transcends the physical act of the holiday.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, the narrative could explicitly state that while the meat is consumed and the physical reality of the event ends, the zichni warlik of the community's unity persists. It completely reframes an administrative task as an ongoing spiritual imperative.
That is a great approach. And another concrete option is to weave the announcements directly into the theology of the divine names, which is the core thesis of the piece.
Right.
The author could tie the Kurban organization to the physical manifestation of understanding God's attributes, like Al-Karim, the generous.
Oh, interesting. How would that read?
Well, the transition could be something like, we have spent this time discussing the divine names as a ladder to comprehending our Creator. This upcoming Kurban drive and the physical effort of our volunteers is how we climb that ladder in physical reality.
It is our attempt to cast an earthly shadow of Al-Karim.
Precisely. And these are really just a few out of all possible ways to organically weave the administrative elements into the narrative. You know, the volunteering aspect could also be tied to the concept of contingent existence, demonstrating how human actions are dependent on divine will, but still require physical participation.
Right. Keeping the reader grounded in that sanctuary space prevents the material from feeling disjointed.
Exactly. And just as the macro structure needs connective tissue, the internal metaphors within the core lecture also need to be explicitly tethered to the main thesis.
Which brings us to our next point. The striking analogy of coal transforming into diamond under pressure risks losing its theological anchor without a clearer link back to the primary topic of the divine names.
Yeah. The author provides a highly resonant explanation of human suffering and spiritual elevation using this coal to diamond metaphor.
It's very powerful.
It is. By referencing the immense physical and psychological pressure faced by historical figures like Bilal, who had a boulder placed on his chest in the desert heat.
Or the prophet's Ayub in his illness.
Right. The text powerfully explains why God puts believers through trials. I mean, the reader can practically feel the weight of the rock.
They really can.
But the weakness, however, is a matter of unfulfilled structural promises, because this lecture is explicitly framed at the very beginning as an introduction to the Esma-ul Husna, the divine names.
Right.
So leaving this metaphor solely in the realm of human endurance leaves the overarching thesis incomplete. The text successfully shows what the pressure does to the human, turning coal to diamond.
But it fails to explicitly show which specific aspect of the divine is applying the pressure.
Exactly. And why that distinction matters in the context of the names.
So, as an objective reader looking at the raw emotion of the Bilal story, I wonder, is there a risk of over-explaining the mechanics of the metaphor?
How do you mean?
Like, if the author explicitly forces a connection to a specific divine name right at the climax of that story, it might dispel the emotional rawness of the suffering.
Ah, turning it into a dry theology lesson?
Right. It could alienate the reader just as they are connecting most deeply with the historical figure's pain.
I see what you mean. Writers often fear that analyzing the magic will dispel it. But in this specific theological context, however, the right anchor actually deepens the emotional resonance.
Really?
Yeah. When the reader is guided to understand that the suffering isn't random cosmic physics or arbitrary cruelty, but a highly specific, intentional application of a divine name, the rawness is amplified by a sense of awe.
The suffering gains a profound architectural purpose.
Exactly. So the suggestion is to explicitly anchor the mechanics of the diamond metaphor to the realization of specific divine names. You want to ensure the emotional weight of the metaphor actively serves the overarching premise of the lecture.
Okay, so
A concrete way to bridge that gap without losing the emotion is to frame the believer's realization of their diamond state as the exact moment they truly comprehend their own smallness against God's greatness.
Oh, drawing on the earlier concepts.
Yeah, because early in the text, the author introduces the concept of saying Allahu Akbar, realizing God is the greatest, and how that linguistic and mental act forces the individual to confront their own smallness, making them tremble.
Right.
The author could tie the diamond metaphor directly to that earlier ontological premise. The narrative could explain that the divine pressure crushes the ego down to its smallest, most essential point.
The carbon.
Yes, the carbon. And that intense realization of smallness is exactly what crystallizes into the diamond. This takes the philosophical premise from the opening pages and executes it through the emotional metaphor later in the text.
Creating a closed loop of logic and feeling. That's beautiful. And looking at the mechanics of actually naming the pressure, the author could explicitly link the divine weight to the manifestation of Al-Sabur, the patient, or Al-Hakim, the wise.
Okay.
The text could illustrate that the hardship is not general, unstructured suffering, but a direct application of these specific attributes acting upon the human soul.
The pressure itself is the wisdom.
Precisely. Bilal becomes a diamond specifically because he is being acted upon by Al-Hakim, and the author could also tie the process to Al-Khaliq, the creator, emphasizing that creation isn't merely a past historical event.
Right. It's an ongoing, agonizing, and beautiful process of spiritual forging in the present moment.
Exactly. And again, these are just a couple of potential ways to thread the metaphor back to the core lesson. The essential requirement is that the emotional weight of the metaphor must actively bear the load of the thesis.
So true. And I think that brings us to the way the author handles audience interaction. Because if an untethered metaphor fractures the internal logic of the lecture, abandoning the established philosophical methodology entirely completely shatters the final segment.
The Q&A segment.
Yes. The Q&A segment treats disparate existential and temporal topics with a uniform rhetorical approach, which inadvertently flattens the nuanced philosophical framework established earlier.
Yeah, the text attempts to answer a massive variety of questions in rapid succession at the end of the transcript. I mean, the subject matter jumps wildly from the deep theology of free will,
using that very well-constructed train analogy to explain kusi irade versus kuli irade.
Right? Jumping from that to highly temporal geopolitical commentary about the election of Barack Obama and American policy on Palestine.
Which is quite a leap.
It is, and then it immediately pivots to interpersonal disputes regarding abusive relatives.
Wow.
Yeah. And the weakness is that by answering these highly varied questions in a vacuum, without applying a unifying analytical methodology, the Q&A feels like a disconnected appendix.
Rather than the culmination of the lesson.
Exactly.
The profound epistemology established in the first half of the lecture, the framework detailing how humans process information, move from effect to cause, and understand the divine through reflections.
It's entirely abandoned just when it could be most practically applied.
Completely. The rhetorical stance shifts from a philosophical guide, equipping the reader with tools, to a general advice columnist simply handing out disparate answers.
So, looking closely at the train analogy for free will, the author describes the overarching divine will, the kuli irade, as a train moving along its tracks. And the human will, the juzi irade, is described as a passenger who can choose to walk freely between the train cars.
Right. The passenger has absolute agency within the confines of the train, but they cannot change the ultimate destination of the train itself. As an objective reader, the train analogy for free will is beautifully clear. But how could the author use the earlier concept of moving from effect to cause, from the physical to the divine, to elevate this specific answer beyond a simple analogy?
Well, the suggestion here is to repurpose the epistemological framework established in the opening to structure the answers in the Q&A. This creates a completely unified philosophical worldview from start to finish.
Right. The goal of a conceptually dense text like this shouldn't be to simply provide a list of correct answers at the end. The goal is to demonstrate to the audience how to use the specific intellectual tools provided in the first hour to arrive at the answers themselves. Okay, So applying this framework to the most interpersonal, grounded question, like the person asking how to deal with their abusive relatives, that really reveals how transformative this structural shift can be.
How so?
Well, the author's current advice is generally just to maintain good character and be patient.
Which is practical.
Practical, but it lacks the philosophical weight of the preceding pages. To elevate it, the author could apply the earlier concept that humans cannot fully comprehend God's essence, but can reflect his attributes.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
The author could reframe doing good to abusive relatives as a deliberate reflection of Al-Wadud, the loving. The text could explain that the good deed is entirely independent of the relative's earthly reaction.
Right, the reader isn't instructed to be kind to an uncle to receive kindness in return.
Exactly. They are instructed to be kind, to manifest the zihni varluk, the mental reality of Al-Wadud in the physical world. This reframes a mundane family dispute into a daily, actionable practice of ontology.
That is brilliant. And applying that same unifying framework to the temporal geopolitical commentary resolves a structural disconnect there as well.
Because geopolitics is inherently difficult to integrate into a transcendent spiritual text.
Exactly. The specific names and policies age very quickly, whereas the theology does not. So if the author chooses to keep the commentary on political leadership or global events, it must be tied directly back to the earlier discussion of absolute versus contingent existence.
Wajib-ul wujud versus mumkin-ul wujud.
Yes. The text can remind the audience that empires, presidents, and policies are strictly contingent existences. They only exist because they are permitted to exist temporarily.
Right.
Therefore, the text can argue that pinning ultimate hope or ultimate despair on contingent entities is a fundamental philosophical error. The author can use the macro philosophy to solve the micro problem of political anxiety, keeping the reader's gaze firmly on the absolute existence.
That seamlessly connects the temporal political question back to the train analogy and the opening paragraphs. The author can essentially tell the reader that while they are free to walk between the train cars and engage with the political reality of their specific car, the track itself, the grand sweep of history, is governed by the absolute.
Exactly. And remember, these are just a few examples of how to ensure the Q&A acts as an applied continuation of the main theological text.
Yeah.
By the end of the material, the reader should possess a new operational framework for looking at their daily life, their interpersonal conflicts, and global events through the specific lens of the divine names and the ontological levels of existence.
Because the overarching focus here is on maintaining structural integrity.
Definitely. When a text builds a foundation as complex and sturdy as the opening of this lecture, every subsequent section, metaphor, and answered question must be clearly supported by those same foundational pillars.
Examining the load-bearing walls ensures the architecture doesn't collapse into disparate, disconnected thoughts when the reader tries to apply the concepts to their own life.
That's the key.
Well, to summarize our core takeaways for today's critique, we have 3 highly actionable suggestions for the author. First, bridge the mundane announcements with the theological concepts. Use established ideas like zihni varluk or the physical manifestation of specific names to maintain the spiritual immersion.
Right.
Second, explicitly tie emotional metaphors, like that powerful coal-to-diamond analogy, back to the core thesis of the divine names, so the emotional weight serves the overarching premise.
Yes.
And third, use the established philosophical and epistemological framework to structure the answers in the Q&A, ensuring unity of thought from the first concept to the final piece of advice. We invite the author to implement these structural and thematic strategies to deepen the impact of this conceptually rich material and to submit the revised work back in for further critique. Keep writing, and we will see you next time.
Welcome to the debate. Usually when we think about our journey through life, we kind of imagine ourselves as the driver of a car.
Right, yeah. Hands firmly on the wheel.
Exactly. We turn the steering wheel, we press the accelerator, and, the vehicle goes exactly where we direct it. It is this really comforting thought, this absolute unfettered control over our physical destination. We like to believe that if we just grip the wheel hard enough, well, we dictate the map.
I mean, it is incredibly empowering. We are deeply attached to the idea that we are the undisputed masters of our fate. We're writing our own story onto a blank canvas. To think otherwise is honestly deeply unsettling for the modern mind.
It really is. But then you encounter the profound world of classical Islamic theology, and suddenly you realize you might not be driving a car at all. You might just be a passenger sort of moving around inside a moving train.
Which is a terrifying thought for control freaks like us.
Yeah, a little bit. So today we are exploring a deeply complex philosophical tension presented in our source material. We're looking at the interplay between human agency, what the text calls kuzi irade, or partial will, and absolute divine will, kulli irade.
And, the text doesn't shy away from how uncomfortable this tension is. It dives straight into the paradox.
It really does. So the central question we are unpacking today is this. Does the source material construct a paradigm where human will fundamentally shapes reality, acting as a true catalyst for what happens in the world?
Or conversely, does it describe a deterministic universe, one where human action is merely a psychological exercise, like an illusion of control that ultimately culminates in absolute submission to a pre-written script?
Right. That exact question is where the friction lies in the text, and it's where we diverge today. I will be arguing that this text explicitly elevates human agency. It presents human effort as this powerful, necessary engine for divine action. From my reading, without the human input, the whole just does not move in the same way. The divine machinery essentially requires our spark.
And I will contend that, if you look closely at the mechanical analogies the author actually uses, they all point to a universe of strict determinism. Human will is present. Yes, we certainly feel it.
We definitely feel it.
Right, but it is fundamentally subservient to an inescapable divine plan. The outcome is fixed regardless of how much we sweat or strive.
Okay, well, let's get into the mechanics of how this actually works. From my perspective, the text explicitly grants operative, real-world power to human agency. The most striking phrase the speaker uses is dille qui dilium, which translates to wish so that I may wish.
It's a heavy phrase.
It is. And think about the mechanics of that statement. This isn't some passive relationship where humans just endure what God decides. The absolute divine will is literally waiting for the human will to activate.
Waiting, sure, but...
Wait, let me just finish the thought. The speaker frames our capacity to choose not as some, meaningless byproduct of consciousness, but as a deliberate divine gift. And he says the shukur, the gratitude for that gift, is the very act of exercising it. You show gratitude for the capacity to choose by making choices.
Right, I hear you. But I read the architecture of his argument quite differently. You're focusing on the invitation to wish, but you have to look at the boundaries the author immediately places around that wishing.
What boundaries?
Well, he compares our will to the movement of water inside a glass. Yes, the water sloshes around, it has its internal dynamics, it forms ripples. We are the water.
Okay.
But the glass itself is firmly held in the hand of the divine, and it is placed exactly where the divine chooses. If I am the water, I can ripple all I want, I can splash against the sides, I can feel incredibly active.
Sure. But if the hand holding the glass moves it from the kitchen table to the counter, my rippling had absolutely zero causal effect on my new coordinates in space.
But hold on. You're treating the water as if its sloshing is totally irrelevant to the creator. To help visualize what the text means by wish so that I may wish, think of an automatic sliding door at a grocery store.
A grocery store door?
Yes, stick with me here. The power to open the door is entirely in the building's electrical grid. That's the absolute will. The grid is infinitely more powerful than you are, but that immense power does absolutely nothing until you, the human being, walk up and step on the sensor.
Okay, I see where you're going. Your partial will is the sensor. The text explicitly says, Kuzi irradie rabim germeden kruli irradie harakete geçirmez. God does not set the absolute will in motion without seeing the partial will. The human being is the initiator. If you don't step on the sensor, the power stays dormant.
That sliding door analogy is clever. I'll give you that, but let me pull you back to the author's actual metaphors, because they tell a very different story. He uses the train analogy.
Right, the train.
He says human will is like choosing to walk 10 train cars forward. You exert energy. You decide to pass the dining car and sit in the front. You feel like you are advancing. But the text explicitly says the train ray üstünde kendi yolunda ilerler. It advances on its own tracks in its own grand trajectory.
But you're still choosing to move.
Yes, but if you are on a train heading from New York to Chicago, walking to the front car doesn't get you to Chicago any faster. And it certainly doesn't change the destination to Boston. The big will encompasses the small will. Your movement is real to you, but it is statistically and physically insignificant to the grand trajectory of reality.
If the train is going to the exact same destination regardless of what we do, why does the author so fiercely criticize passivity? This is where your deterministic reading just completely falls apart for me.
How so?
The speaker creates a very vivid image of the person sitting on a couch, looking at a door that is just slightly ajar. He mocks the person who just sits there, completely passive, expecting the door to miraculously fall open on its own so they can walk through.
He does mock them, yes.
Right. He says, reach out your hand, try it. Open it, hit it. If the destination is completely predetermined, if the hand holding the glass of water is going to move us to the next room regardless of what we do, then pushing the door is utterly meaningless.
I wouldn't say meaningless.
But the text argues that if you don't physically apply force to the door, it remains shut. Doesn't that explicitly mean my human action genuinely dictates a physical outcome in reality? The door stays shut if I do nothing. It opens if I push it. That is pure causality.
Is it, though? Because if we are going to talk about causality, we have to look at what happens when the cause doesn't produce a desired effect. And the text actually addresses this failure state directly.
You mean when things go wrong?
Or the exact opposite of what you intended occurs.
Well, you're talking about the limits of human effort. We aren't omnipotent.
Right. And if you're listening to this right now, you might be thinking, well, if the train goes to the same station anyway, why shouldn't I just take a nap in the back car? The author knows we will ask this, so he introduces the concept of the compass.
Ah, yes, the north-pointing compass.
He says that sometimes, despite all your meticulous planning, the pusula hep kuzeyi gösteriyorsa, if the compass always points north, you realize you cannot overpower the system. The reality of the universe overrides your partial will.
And he gives a prescription for that moment.
He does. And what is the prescribed response in the text when your effort fails? Ya Rabbi sen böyle dileymişsin. Başım gözüm üstüne. O Lord, you have wished it so, upon my head and my eyes.
Which translates to complete willing submission.
Yes. The fact that the ultimate failure of human effort is built directly into this philosophy proves that the outcome was always dictated by the whole rather than the part.
I don't think it proves that at all.
How could it not? The door analogy you mentioned isn't about changing physical reality, it's about human psychological readiness. God makes us push the door so we feel the resistance of reality. We are forced into a mandatory theatrical performance of trying solely so we can realize our own smallness when the compass points north anyway.
You're reading a level of cosmic cynicism into the text that frankly just isn't there. You're collapsing the timeline the author carefully constructs to make it look like a rigged game.
A rigged game?
Yeah, like we're just hamsters on a wheel. The submission you were talking about, saying, "Oh Lord, you have wished it so," only applies after exhausting all human measures. It is the absolute final step, not the first. And we really need to deeply explain how the text separates these steps, specifically the concepts of istishara and ijtihad.
The practical versus the spiritual.
Exactly. The text places istishara, which is active consultation and practical human effort, fundamentally before ijtihad, which is the spiritual yielding to divine guidance. And istishara isn't just, casually asking a buddy for advice.
No, it's rigorous.
In this context, it is the exhausting physical requirement to gather data, calculate risks, engage your intellect, and wrap your hands around every material cause available to you. Say you're starting a business or trying to heal from an illness.
You have to do the work.
You have to hire the experts, run the models, take the medicine, do the physical therapy. You are not even allowed to submit to the divine will until your human agency has hit its absolute mortal limit. If the universe were purely deterministic, the sequence wouldn't matter at all. You could just start with submission.
But why mandate the exhaustion if the result is foregone?
Because submission, in this text, isn't a replacement for agency. It is a healthy psychological boundary. It is the grace one accepts only after agency has done everything it can. It acknowledges that we are not gods, sure, but it doesn't strip us of our humanity.
I see the appeal of that, but
Let me just add, the compass pointing north doesn't mean you shouldn't try to navigate your ship. It means when a Category 5 hurricane overpowers your vessel, you don't lose your mind screaming at the sky, you surrender to the reality larger than yourself. It's a mechanism for resilience, not fatalism.
I understand the psychological comfort of that interpretation. I really do. But look at the specific words the author uses when that hurricane hits. Mifer. Where is the escape? You cannot flee from a reality that is entirely encompassing you.
It's rhetorical, though.
Is it? By telling the audience that after all their running, all their istishade, the outcome may still be the exact opposite of their design, the text is reinforcing that the part is entirely at the mercy of the whole.
Mercy, yes, but not irrelevance.
The reason the text traps us in the glass of water isn't to mock us. It's a mechanism designed to exhaust the human ego. The speaker literally says that knowing God's greatness comes from knowing our own smallness. The effort we put in isn't to change the world. It's to break our illusion of control so we finally admit we have no real power.
I think that's misreading the ultimate spiritual goal of the text entirely. It's not about exhausting us into defeat. It's about applying pressure to forge something entirely new. And actually, that transitions us perfectly into perhaps the most striking imagery in the entire transcript, the metaphor of the coal and the diamond.
The geological pressure metaphor. This is where the text tackles the problem of suffering directly.
Right. The text shifts here from the dry mechanics of free will to the visceral reality of enduring a life we cannot fully control. The speaker notes that coal and diamonds are both made of the exact same elemental material, carbon. The only difference is that the diamond has been subjected to immense, crushing geological pressure over time.
And we have to ask who is applying that pressure, because it certainly isn't the human.
Well, no.
The text says that to become a Bilal, referencing a historical figure in Islamic history who endured immense, agonizing torture for his beliefs, you have to be placed under that same immense pressure by the divine. The speaker advises the audience, do not ask God, why did you keep me under so much pressure?
Because it defeats the purpose.
Right. He says, if you complain, you are essentially saying to God, I am complaining about becoming a diamond. I am content to remain coal. Now tell me, how is the coal responsible for the tectonic plates crushing it?
It isn't responsible for the plates.
Exactly. The coal is completely passive. The divine provides the environmental pressure, the divine decides how long the pressure lasts, and the divine decides when the diamond is finished. The author says, Evet kulum seni el-masedeceğim. Yes, my servant, I am going to make you a diamond.
Okay, but
God is the one doing the making. The human's only role is to stop complaining about the pain of the process. We are just the carbon being acted upon by divine geology.
You just quoted the turning point of the metaphor, and you're interpreting it as completely passive. Let's look at the phrasing again. The speaker says that the one who complains about the pressure effectively says, I prefer to remain coal. That implies a profound active choice.
A choice not to whine isn't much of a choice.
It's a huge choice. Yes, the divine provides the environmental pressure. We do not choose our tragedies. We do not choose the tectonic shifts of our lives, the illnesses, the financial collapses, the losses. But human agency, how one chooses to internally process and respond to that pressure, determines the outcome.
Internally, maybe.
If you complain, if you reject the spiritual growth and become better, you remain coal. If you accept the pressure and utilize your partial will to maintain your faith and integrity, you crystallize into a diamond. The pressure is deterministic, yes, but the crystallization requires the active, agonizing participation of the human will.
I disagree entirely, and the text provides a specific, real-world example that proves my point. Let's remember the context of the speaker's advice here. He is addressing people going through intense personal suffering.
The question about the relatives?
Yes. Someone asked him a question about being deeply wronged and slandered by their own relatives to the point where they are physically trembling and losing peace in their own home. What is the author's response? He says, God is putting you under pressure so you can become a diamond. Let him make you a diamond. And then he actively minimizes the agency of the people causing the harm.
You're referring to the quote about the striker versus the orchestrator.
Yes.
Vurduranabiliyorsanız, vuranın kim olduğu çok fazla da önemli değil.
If you know who is orchestrating the strike, the one who is actually hitting you isn't that important.
Right.
That is the ultimate statement of determinism. The author is telling a victim of severe slander that the relatives harming them are basically just mindless tools in the hand of God, applying necessary pressure to turn the victim into a diamond.
It's a shift in perspective. It's a total erasure of human agency. The abuser's agency is reduced to being a mere instrument of divine will, and the victim's agency is reduced to just quietly enduring it. Where is the grand human catalyst in that scenario? The whole system is a closed loop of divine action. God orchestrates the strike, God applies the pressure, God makes the diamond. We are just experiencing the friction of the machinery.
Wait, let's unpack that, because if you stop reading there, it sounds like pure fatalism. But you're ignoring the radical ethical instruction he gives immediately after that statement. He doesn't just pat the victim on the head and say, endure it passively.
He tells them to be good.
He commands the questioner to actively do good to the very people who are harming them.
Which is an internal harmonizing, not a change in physical reality.
It is a massive change in psychological and moral reality. He says doing good to someone who does good to you is transactional. It's basic human nature. But doing good as someone who actively harms you is erkishikari, the work of a true, courageous, spiritually mature person, and he doesn't pretend this is easy.
No, he says it's incredibly hard.
He talks about his own internal psychological battle. He admits how his own ego violently fights him when he tries to pray for those who wronged him. That internal battle, that is agency at its absolute peak.
But it's an internal battle, not an external one. The track doesn't change.
The internal battle is the forge. The friction you mention isn't just passive suffering. It's the sparks of a human engine trying to align its partial will with absolute goodness. If we were just passive tools in a closed loop, the author wouldn't spend so much time urging his audience to proactively practice goodness toward their enemies.
But does it change the outcome?
That requires immense, agonizing exertion of the human will. He is demanding that we use our partial will to break the cycle of human retaliation. That is how the coal becomes a diamond. The abuser might be the pressure, but the victim's choice to forgive is the crystallization.
It requires exertion, certainly. I am not denying that the text demands immense psychological effort, but we have to rigorously distinguish between the sensation of effort and the efficacy of effort in changing the grand design.
They aren't mutually exclusive.
But look at it this way. Walking from the back of a moving train to the front requires exertion. Your legs will burn, you will be out of breath, you are making complex choices about which seats to pass. You feel incredibly active, but you are still arriving at the exact station the conductor programmed.
I mean, sure, in that specific metaphor.
The author wants us to be good, to pray for our enemies, to push the door, to step on the sensor. But he frames all of this as a way to harmonize our internal state with a universe we cannot physically alter. When he says the compass always points north, he means reality is fixed.
Fixed in its overarching rules, perhaps.
Fixed in its destination. The kuzi irada, our partial will, is just the mechanism by which we either peacefully align ourselves with the north or exhaust ourselves fighting it. But no amount of human agency makes the needle point south.
And that, I think, brings us to the core of our disagreement, which serves as a perfect place to sort of synthesize what we've uncovered today. Throughout this debate, I have maintained that the source material presents a genuinely symbiotic universe. The text explicitly tells us, wish so that I may wish, constructing a paradigm where human agency is the vital, required engine that sparks reality. Like the sensor on the sliding door, God's absolute will waits for our localized input.
A generous reading, I'd say.
Well, whether it's physically pushing the slightly ajar door or making the agonizing active choice to forgive an enemy so the pressure of life turns us into a diamond,
rather than crushing us into dust, human will fundamentally shapes the moral and physical reality we inhabit.
And I have maintained that the materials analogies ultimately construct an inescapable deterministic container. From the water sloshing helplessly inside the glass held by the divine, to the passenger walking the aisles of a train hurtling toward a fixed destination, human will operates only as a localized illusion of control.
The illusion of control.
Exactly. The text's assertion that the compass inevitably points north, and its framing of human abusers as mere instruments applying divine pressure, confirms that our choices do not alter the final trajectory of reality. Our agency is ultimately subservient to the absolute will. The effort is real to us, but the outcome is predetermined by the whole.
Despite our deep disagreement on the exact physics of this theology, I think we both agree that the source material masterfully balances a profoundly difficult philosophical tension.
Oh, without a doubt.
It refuses to give the reader an easy out. It demands rigorous, uncompromising human action, telling you to calculate, to consult, to exhaust your intellect, to physically push the door, while simultaneously requiring ultimate spiritual surrender to a reality larger than yourself.
Absolutely. It is a highly sophisticated framework that refuses to let the listener off the hook. It completely denies them the laziness of fatalism. Like we said, you can't just sleep in the back of the train. But it also strips them of the arrogance of absolute autonomy.
Right.
Grappling with the interplay between the part and the whole offers anyone, regardless of their background, profound layers to explore regarding human resilience, suffering, and purpose.
Beautifully put. The beauty of examining multiple perspectives on these metaphysical paradoxes is that it reveals how deeply nuanced our daily existence truly is. So, as we leave you today, I want you to think back to that opening image and look at your own life. Are you the driver gripping the steering wheel, dictating your exact coordinates? Or are you the passenger on the train, free to walk the aisles but bound to a destination chosen long before you boarded?
Or perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the mysterious, beautiful space between the pushing of the door and the wind that ultimately swings it open.
We'll leave you to ponder the boundaries of your own agency. Thank you for joining us on the debate.
Try to picture absolute nothingness.
That is actually incredibly difficult to do.
Right. I mean, I don't mean a dark room or deep space or just closing your eyes. I mean sheer, absolute non-existence. Try to hold that concept in your brain for just a second.
You really can't.
You can't. Your brain automatically tries to fill the void with like a color or a shape, or at least the concept of a boundary. It literally cannot process the absence of everything.
Which is a perfect starting point for what we are doing today.
Exactly. Today we are looking at why human minds are fundamentally incapable of grasping the universe's biggest truths using our, standard tools of measurement. Welcome, learner, to another deep dive.
We are so glad you are here with us.
We are exploring a really fascinating, intricate series of lectures by Mustafa İslamoğlu today, and our mission is to take his profound philosophical and theological frameworks and, figure out how they actually apply to the deeply frustrating, beautiful, complex reality of your everyday life.
It is a pretty ambitious journey, honestly. We are going to examine the fundamental architecture of reality, why the intense pressures you face might actually be the mechanism of your elevation, and how to navigate the ultimate paradox of free will.
Yeah, it really requires us to stretch our conceptual boundaries and challenge how we perceive everything from, a glass of water to the people who wrong us.
It really does.
Okay, let's unpack this core problem first. To even begin understanding our place in the universe, we have to establish the sheer terrifying scale of what we are trying to comprehend.
Right, because according to Islamoğlu's lectures, trying to grasp the absolute essence of God, the infinite, is fundamentally impossible for the human mind.
The lectures explain that we are given the divine names, known as the Esma, which act as a sort of conceptual ladder.
Yeah, a ladder is a great way to look at it. We can understand the concept of the merciful because we understand human mercy.
But that ladder only helps us grasp the identity or the attributes, right? It never reaches the core essence.
Exactly.
It reminds me of trying to run a simulation of the entire Milky Way galaxy on a beige 1990s desktop computer. The motherboard isn't just going to lag, it is going to catastrophically melt.
The hardware simply isn't built for that software. The speaker quotes the historical figure Abu Bakr, who captured this perfectly when he said, "To comprehend him is to comprehend that one is incapable of comprehending him.
I love that. That realization of failure is the comprehension itself.
Yes. And there's also a brilliant line from Zia Pasha brought up in the lectures. He says, "This small mind cannot comprehend the high truth. This scale cannot carry such weight."
The scale analogy is so good.
Think about a highly sensitive digital scale in a lab. If you drop a literal mountain onto it, the scale doesn't give you an error message.
No, it shatters into a million pieces.
Right. The human right works the exact same way when presented with the infinite. The only way to actually grasp the infinite is to truly deeply understand your own infinite smallness.
So the goal isn't to build a bigger scale. It's to realize the scale is the wrong tool entirely.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And to give us a tool we actually can use, the speaker breaks existence down into 3 distinct states.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, there is the necessary existence. This is God. The underlying logic is that his non-existence is impossible to even hypothesize, because you need to exist and rely on the architecture of reality just to form the thought.
You can't think without the framework already being there.
Exactly. Second, there is the possible existence. That is everything else. You, me, the chair you are sitting on, the entire physical universe. It exists simply because the necessary existence commanded it to be.
Okay.
And third is the impossible existence, which is that absolute nothingness we tried to picture earlier.
But here's where I hit a wall with this. If our mental scales fundamentally break when we try to weigh the necessary existence, and the impossible existence fries our circus just trying to picture it, why do we even try to understand reality at all?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, if the 90s desktop is going to melt, why boot it up in the first place?
Because while we cannot comprehend the infinite top-down, we are completely submerged in the possible existence. We still have to navigate the physical world.
That makes sense.
The lectures pivot from the unreachable infinite to the incredibly immediate question of how we process the reality we actually inhabit. And Islamoğlu argues that this possible existence manifests in 3 distinct ways.
Yeah, the lectures break this down into external, mental, and verbal manifestations. Let's take something simple, like a glass of water on your desk.
Okay.
The physical water, the liquid you can drink, is the external or real manifestation. But then there is the mental manifestation, which is the image in the concept of water that lives in your brain.
Right.
And finally, the verbal manifestation, which is the linguistic label we slap onto it. Su in Turkish, water in English, ma in Arabic.
What is genuinely fascinating about this framework is how much weight the speaker gives to the mental reality.
Oh, absolutely.
We tend to think of physical objects as the ultimate truth because we can touch them. But the mental concept is universally indelible. The speaker uses a wonderful example.
The apple one.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you hear the word apple, your brain does not conjure up the letters A-P-P-L-E floating in a void.
No, you instantly picture the fruit.
Exactly. The mental shadow of the object is universal across all cultures and eras. Thinking of water won't physically quench your biological thirst, but the mental reality of water is arguably more permanent than the physical liquid, which just, evaporates.
Wait, does this mean our mental reality is almost more enduring than physical reality? Because that has massive implications.
It really does.
It's like the difference between holding a physical paperback book, having the PDF on your hard drive, and just looking at the file name itself. The paperback can burn in a fire, the file name can be edited, but the actual information, the mental concept, survives all of it.
It does survive. The speaker offers a deeply poignant application of this, actually. Consider a mother who passes away. She loses her external physical manifestation in this world, but her mental existence remains deeply, vividly, and permanently rooted in her child's mind. The physical form is temporary, but the mental imprint outlasts it.
Wow.
And this framework of mental reality leads to one of the most provocative philosophical arguments in the entire lecture series. The idea that absolute atheism is technically a logical impossibility.
Yeah, I was trying to wrap my head around this. If atheism is a denial, that means you have to build a mental shrine to God just to have something to tear down.
Yes.
Which means the denial itself is a paradox.
You have hit the exact mechanism of the argument you cannot deny a void. To say God doesn't exist, you are forced to first invoke the mental concept of God.
Right. You have to put it on the stage.
You have to give the concept a name, construct its attributes in your mind, and place it on your mental stage before you can push against it. Because that mental presence must be established for the denial to occur, The denial becomes a logical tautology.
That is just a wild reframing. You are actively affirming the mental existence in the very split-second act of verbally denying the external existence.
Precisely.
But if these mental concepts are so incredibly powerful and our minds are the primary arena where we engage with reality, how do we use our minds to reach higher truths without reverting back to that, that shattered scale we talked about?
We have to completely reverse our approach. Islamoğlu insists that starting from the top, trying to decode the infinite mind of God, is fundamentally the wrong way to ask questions.
It's like starting at the end of the book.
It is the equivalent of trying to write a postdoctoral dissertation before you have learned how to read the alphabet. You have to start from the bottom. You have to start from the dirt.
The lecture traces this physical reality beautifully, I thought. You look at a glass and you realize it comes from clay. You trace the clay back and it comes from the earth. The earth is cooled magma. The magma ultimately comes from ash. You just reverse engineer the physical world step by step.
Which brings us to the chemistry of human character. The speaker points out a basic geological fact. Both coal and diamonds are fundamentally just carbon.
They are ash.
Exactly, they're ash. The only difference is that a diamond is coal that has endured intense, heavy, unrelenting pressure over a massive amount of time.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
But I have to pause here and push back a little.
Sure.
I know the whole pressure makes diamonds thing is printed on every motivational poster in every corporate break room. It can feel like such a cliche.
It definitely can.
But the lectures take this beyond just a hollow productivity slogan and turn it into a profound theological and psychological framework. If you turn to God and ask, why did you put me under so much pressure? Why is my life so hard? You are essentially complaining about the exact mechanical process required to elevate your nature.
It ceases to be a cliche when you look at the historical examples the speaker provides. He brings up figures like Bilal, an early companion of the Prophet. Bilal wasn't facing metaphorical workplace stress. He was a slave dragged into the scorching Meccan desert, pinned to the burning sand with a massive boulder crushing his chest, being tortured to renounce his beliefs.
He went through literal physical agony.
He was forged into a historical diamond through unimaginable pressure. The speaker's point is that to complain about the pressure of life is to essentially say, I would prefer to remain as coal.
But let me push back on the romanticization of suffering here, because it borders on a kind of toxic positivity if we aren't careful.
That is a fair concern.
It is very easy to say, become a diamond when you are safely sitting in a studio reading about legendary historical figures.
Yeah.
But when you are the coal currently getting crushed, when you are dealing with grief or financial ruin or a health crisis, you don't care about becoming a diamond. You just want the boulder off your chest.
Absolutely.
So how does this philosophy practically change how someone faces a truly terrible day?
It doesn't remove the boulder, but it radically alters the internal narrative of the person underneath it. If you believe the pressure is entirely random and meaningless, your psyche shatters. You become a victim of a chaotic universe.
Which is a terrifying place to be.
But if you adopt this framework, you believe the pressure is purposeful. You believe it is specifically calibrated to crystallize your character. That shift in perspective doesn't stop the pain, but it gives you a reason to endure it. You transition from being passively crushed to actively participating in your own forging.
Which perfectly tees up the biggest question of all. If God is the one applying the boulder, applying the pressure to forge us, do we actually have any say in our own lives? Or are we just passive lumps of carbon waiting to see what happens?
That is the ultimate question.
The lectures dive deeply into this tension between absolute will, which is God's, and restricted will, which is human autonomy.
The speaker frames our restricted will as a profound divine gift. And the universal rule of gratitude is that you show thanks for a gift by using it in a manner consistent with its nature.
Like, if you are given wealth, gratitude is being generous with that wealth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Therefore, the only way to show gratitude for the gift of free will is the active, rigorous use of it. You are required to desire, to analyze, and to choose.
To map out how this works alongside a divine plan, Islamoğlu uses this incredible analogy of a train.
I love this analogy.
Imagine God's absolute will is a massive, unstoppable train moving on its tracks toward a fixed destination. Human will is your ability to walk freely between the train cars.
Right.
You can choose to sprint 10 cars forward, you can sit down in the dining car, you can walk backward. You have absolute autonomy within the bounds of the train, even though the train itself is moving along a preordained track.
It is a brilliant way to reconcile destiny with choice.
But hold on, it sounds a bit like playing an open-world video game, where the main storyline is hard-coded into the software. You have absolute freedom in how you navigate all the side quests, but the game is going to end the exact same way regardless.
That's a very modern way to look at it, yeah.
If the train is going to the same destination anyway, why does walking between the cars even matter? Why not just sit down and wait?
Because the side quests are the point. The journey between the cars is the actual forging process we just talked about.
Yeah.
It dictates the state of your character when you finally arrive at the destination.
Okay.
The speaker uses another metaphor here, the slightly open door. If the divine will leaves a door slightly ajar for you, it is not an invitation to sit on the couch and wait for a gust of wind to blow it open.
You have to actually get up.
You have to get up, walk across the room, put your hand on the wood, and push. You are required to take every single possible action within your restricted will, whether that is rigorously applying for jobs, seeking medical treatment, or choosing a marriage partner, before you surrender to the ultimate outcome. You have to exhaust your autonomy.
So, walking between the train cars isn't just about personal achievement, it's about how we navigate the space, which inevitably means bumping into the other passengers.
Yeah, exactly.
This brings us to the applied ethics portion of the lectures. And Islamolu takes these massive metaphysical concepts and drops them right onto the street corner, starting with how we treat a beggar.
This is where the philosophy becomes uncomfortably practical. The speaker tells a story about the prophet asking his companions to pledge never to ask others for help. He specifically told them that if they dropped their whip while riding a camel, they should not ask someone walking by to hand it up to them.
They had to get it themselves.
They should dismount and get it themselves.
And the detail the speaker goes into to explain why is fascinating. A camel doesn't just sit down like a dog.
No, it does not.
It is an architectural collapse. The speaker describes this incredibly long, multi-step groaning ordeal. The camel has to buckle its front knobby knees, shift its massive weight backward, lower its hind legs, and settle into the dust.
It's a huge production.
And then it has to do the whole violently awkward process in reverse to stand back up. The point of detailing that ordeal is to illustrate the sheer burden you place on another human being when you ask them for a favor. You are making someone go through a metaphorical camel dismount just to hand you a whip.
It emphasizes intense self-reliance. Yet the lectures balance this with the other side of the equation. While you shouldn't ask for help, how do you treat the person who does ask?
Right, because people do ask.
The speaker references the Quranic chapter of Duha, which explicitly commands never to scold a beggar. You are under no obligation to give them your money, but you are absolutely forbidden from humiliating them.
That's a crucial distinction.
The speaker even mentions a fascinating phenomenon, the give so they may give beggar.
Oh, this was so interesting.
This is someone who collects money only to quietly leave it at the door of the truly destitute. It is a hidden mechanism to teach people that the divine is the true provider, using human interaction merely as the delivery system.
Then the lectures scale all the way up from a street corner to the machinery of global empires. Islamolu looks at modern history through the same lens of massive, unstoppable systems, specifically referencing the election of Barack Obama.
Yes, and we should be clear, we are just outlining the speaker's analysis here without endorsing or rejecting it.
Absolutely. We are impartially reporting his viewpoint here. He argues that while the election of a black president was a profoundly soothing moment for the historical pain of oppressed people, it fundamentally did not change the underlying Leviathan of U.S. policy.
And by Leviathan, he is referring to the bureaucratic, systemic monster of empire that operates independently of whoever happens to be sitting behind the desk.
Right.
Islamolu specifically points to foreign policy regarding Palestine as the true metric of whether the Leviathan has changed its nature. In his analysis, the geopolitical machine remains entirely the same.
He takes a very stark view here.
He does. He suggests that the U.S. is at the beginning of the end, facing inevitable internal turmoil unless it undergoes a miraculous shift in how it grasps truth.
It is a heavy systemic perspective.
Right.
But what I find brilliant about these lectures is that after zooming out to global superpowers, they zoom right back in to the most difficult, intimate challenge a human being can face. Radical forgiveness.
Yes, the question from the audience.
A woman in the audience asks the speaker about her in-laws, who had viciously and relentlessly slandered her.
The speaker's response to her relies on a profound philosophical distinction between two types of goodness. The first is hisabi goodness.
Okay.
This is calculating goodness. It operates on a ledger. You are good to me, so I am good to you.
Very transactional.
Exactly. The second is hasbi goodness. This is sincere, absolute goodness. It means doing good simply because the act of goodness is inherently valuable in the universe, completely regardless of who is receiving it.
So what does this all mean? Because hisabi, that calculating goodness, is just default human nature, isn't it?
It is.
Our egos demand a return on investment. If I buy you a coffee, there's a quiet expectation you'll buy the next one. If you insult me, I cut you out of my life. Doing good to someone who actively slandered you is next level tough. It feels completely unnatural.
It is entirely unnatural, which is exactly why transcending it is the mechanism that turns the coal into the diamond.
Ah, tying it back to the diamond.
The speaker explains that returning good for evil makes you an erkisi. In Turkish, this translates to a truly courageous, noble person, a title that transcends gender. It's the peak of ethical maturity.
But he admits it's hard, right?
He is highly realistic about this. He admits how incredibly difficult it is for him personally. He shares that when people wrong him, he forces himself to pray for them, asking that their internal spite gas be replaced with love gas.
Spite gas and love gas. It's a quirky phrasing, but you can really feel the desperation in it. He's actively wrestling with his own desire for revenge.
Exactly. He is forcing his own ego into submission. The lecture points out that every bad deed is essentially a commercial for evil in the world, and every good deed is a commercial for good.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it.
When you retaliate against a slanderous in-law, you are just running another ad for their campaign of toxicity. You have to decide which broadcast you are going to fund with your actions.
So to reach that level of hasbi goodness, to stop operating on a ledger and become that noble diamond, we have to actively seek knowledge. We have to train our minds to see past the transaction. And the speaker heavily advocates for studying the masters to do this.
He does. He recommends diving into classic theological texts to build this mental framework. He points to works like Tahavi's Equade, Maturity's Tawhid, and writings by Abu Hanifa, Ibn al-Qayyim, and Sayyid Sabiq.
And for context for you learner, these aren't just random authors. These are the foundational architects of entire schools of Islamic jurisprudence and theology. They are titans of history. But right after elevating them, Islam-ul issues this massive warning about how we should read their books.
He issues a huge warning. He says that treating any book, other than the Quran itself, as 100% flawless from cover to cover is actually a deep, profound insult to the human author.
Wait, an insult?
Yes.
Yeah.
He argues that if you were to resurrect these great historical scholars and tell them that their work was utterly without error, they would verbally attack you. They would view it as an insult because you would be equating their limited human intellect with the infinite mind of God.
I found that incredibly refreshing. It essentially says don't turn your scholars into idols. It gives you, the listener, absolute permission to read critically.
It is very empowering.
You can deeply revere a source of knowledge without disabling your own critical thinking. You are required to use your restricted will, your intellect, even when you are reading the most brilliant minds in history.
Let's synthesize the ground we have covered today.
Let's do it.
We started by looking at a mental scale that shatters when it tries to weigh the infinite, realizing that our minds are built for the possible existence where mental realities often outlive physical ones.
Right.
We looked at the heavy, crushing boulders in our lives and reframed them not as meaningless torture, but as the intense pressure required to forge our character into a diamond.
And we recognize that while the train of destiny is moving on its tracks, we must actively push the doors open and exhaust our free will within the cars.
We saw the intense burden of relying on others, yet the absolute necessity of preserving their dignity when they rely on us. And we learned that true, courageous goodness is never a transaction on a ledger.
Which means the next time you feel completely crushed by the demands of your life, your family, or your work, you have the philosophical tools to fundamentally reframe that experience. You are not being crushed. You are being forged.
That is the shift in perspective.
And think back to that broken scale we talked about at the very beginning, the one that shatters under the weight of the universe. Maybe the ultimate goal isn't to build a stronger scale.
What do you mean?
Maybe the goal is to stop trying to constantly measure everything. Measuring our suffering, measuring our interactions, measuring whether someone deserves our forgiveness, and instead just focus entirely on the quality of the diamond we are becoming.
That is the beautiful, difficult leap from calculating goodness to absolute goodness.
Which leaves you with something to ponder on your own this week. Think about the person who annoyed or wronged you the most recently, the one who really tested your patience.
We all have one.
We really do. What if they weren't just a random obstacle in your way? What if they were specifically placed in your train car today for one reason only, to test if your goodness is just a calculation on a ledger or if it is absolute?
That is a heavy, transformative question to carry with you.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, learner. We hope it gave you some genuine insight to take into your week. Keep walking the train. Take care.